Marathons, how to get in, and are they worth the hype? Knowing what kind of runner you are is key when it comes to planning your races. You may have seen a lot of hype on social media or just the media in general about the world major marathons like New York or Boston. Even when I tell people that I coach runners for a living, I often like to throw out names like, we like to help people train for the New York City Marathon, or we train people for the Boston Marathon. Why do I do this? Because most people have heard of these races, but just because they are really well known by everyone in the world or the general population doesn't mean that they are the end all, be all of running. In fact, there are dozens of marathons that take place every weekend around the globe. Each state in the United States has several marathons every weekend or throughout the year. Some states like California probably have close to 100 or more marathons every single calendar year. So what makes these world major marathons like the Boston Marathon, New York Marathon so special? Well, they have been selected by Abbott World Majors Association because they meet special criteria that we'll talk about later in this episode. The biggest criteria is basically the size of the race and the type of facilities that they have. Local large marathons, like the one closest to our house, has a couple thousand people, whereas a world major marathon would have tens of thousands of people. What is the benefit to having such a large race? Well, it really depends on your goals and also how you like to race. Some athletes thrive with crowd support and lots of people to run with, while other people don't get any benefits from the crowd support and they might actually see a decrease in their performance. And they don't actually enjoy running on the super busy courses where you have to weave in between people. You have to factor in these things when you are considering registering or trying to qualify for a world major marathon. Another factor is the whole travel and money aspect. Traveling for a race that's located internationally or even flying to a race, even if it's within your country, can be really stressful, and it actually takes more time, energy, and planning. The cost is also a huge factor. When I was 23 years old, Jason and I ran the Boston Marathon for the first time, and I remember we almost drained our entire savings account to make the trip out there for the first time. If you have a lot of disposable income, or you make it a priority to save up like we did, the majors can be a great opportunity and a really fun way to spice up your running. But we also want to point out that attempting to run all of the world majors is something that does take substantial amounts of money, as well as, yes, you have to qualify, get in, all of those things, but it also is very expensive. So today we're going to be talking about what are the 7 world majors. They recently added one, so it used to be 6 for as long as I can remember. I mean, I've been coaching runners for over a decade, and now there are 7. Jason has done 2 world majors. I have only done 1, but I've done it 5 times, so I definitely know what it feels like to be in those world major environments. Then it's, how does a major marathon compare to a local race? So it's a completely different experience, and we'll go into the details there. We'll also talk about what is all the hype around this whole 6-star finishers, 7-star finishers medal. How do you get it? What are the options for marathons? So a lot of times when someone is newer to running, they think, I want to run like the New York City Marathon, or I want to run the Boston Marathon, just because they've heard of it before. But there are other marathons, and there's a lot of options that you have when it comes to doing marathons. Even if you want to do a big marathon, there's other ones that you can do where there will be people to run with, there will be a lot of crowd support. So it's all about finding what you like and utilizing that when planning your races. So just kicking things off with, what are the 7 world major marathons and what makes them major?
Yeah, so World Marathon Majors. When we start to talk about these, we know about the ones here in the U.S. if you're a United States citizen, Boston and Chicago. And just a little background: Chicago is typically has the highest number of spectators out of any of these that we're going to be talking about. So it's estimated around 1.7 million spectators. New York City. Oh, sorry, there's three in the U.S. Did I say two?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's three. And then NYC, obviously, there's over 1 million spectators. This is the largest field, and
Over how many?
um, over 1 million spectators.
Oh my gosh.
And this is the largest actual field of runners, so
Mhm.
it's average about 53,000 runners. Chicago's about 45,000. And then Boston is, the oldest marathon in the U.S. That one only has roughly around 35,000 every year. And so, I've done Boston, I've done Chicago. Can I noticeably recall the differences in terms of spectator support? I guess I can, just because in Chicago you're kind of like in the city the entire time, and so it does feel like there are more crowds and more people. In Boston you start off far west, 26 miles west of Boston, and so you are, running from rural areas into the city. So there are some periods in Boston that aren't as busy. And so those are the three in the U.S. Tokyo is one, and this is the most massive elite start out of any marathon. There's about 1 million spectators there as well,
Whoa.
about 35,000 runners. And London's considered one of the most highly watched marathons in the world. And so this one has, about 43,000 runners. And then Berlin is considered one of the fastest marathon. I think 8 of the last 10 marathon world records have been set there. And it's about 47,000 athletes that run that one. And then for the newest one, it's Sydney in Australia. So this one just started, I think this last year they named it, and then this year in 2025 it's going to be in August, so it'll be part of the World Marathon Majors. And I guess if you're interested in doing any of these or learning more, a good place to start would be just going to the Abbott World Majors website. And so it's worldmarathonmajors.com. You can create a profile or an account, and if you've already done any of the races, like I had done, it will match the results instantly. I was shocked how, when I logged in, it claimed my results from Boston and Chicago. So
Oh, really?
it was kind
That
of
is
cool because at the
cool.
top it tells you how many total stars you have, what's your fastest
Oh.
major. For me, it was Chicago, and then your average time too over the course of all of the majors.
Really?
And then if you're 40 or above, they have age group world rankings, which I don't know why they don't have it for under 40, but maybe it's something they're working on. So yeah, just kind of a cool little profile there where you can have a dashboard, you can track your progress. I guess they advertise it as you can set goals and search, manage, or access the digital global Run Club dashboard where you can kind of plan out when you want to do certain events. Now, you mentioned this earlier, it's not always a given that you're going to obtain entry into these events, especially some of the international ones. And so there's a couple ways you can go about this. There is the Gold Club, which is through Abbott. You can join that. I think it's a $350 yearly investment, and you can get access to bonus race draw entries. So you basically get more chance to end up getting your name drawn in the lottery. And so that would be kind of my recommendation for starters. And then, the other really big thing here is if you're looking at doing an international marathon and you live in the U.S., I would look through Destination Marathons, which is now Sports Tours International. I would look through them or Marathon Tours, because through them you can book your entire package, like the hotel, and you can obtain race entry for some of the majors, not all of them. I believe Berlin and Sydney you can, and London you can for one of those websites. The ones that you won't be able to obtain automatic entry through are Tokyo, NYC, Boston, Chicago. You have to qualify in another way, either by time or, NYC has their program where if you participate in so many of their local races throughout the year, then you can obtain an entry that way. So lots to think about when you start planning. This is the race I want to do, or I want to start checking these world majors off my bucket list. And I have a lot of athletes that have come to me that have done maybe like 2 or 3 or 4 of them, and so they're somewhat experienced, but now they're trying to get the international ones, right? And so they are sometimes waiting year after year to see if they get their name drawn, and it's not always a given. And so patience, I think, is really important when you think about the longevity piece of how long this could take to obtain the 6 stars. And I think I saw it was the total number of people that have ever done this and gotten the 6 stars is just under 9,000 people. And so I think it was like 900 people last year obtained the 6 star. So if about 1,000 people are getting it a year, worldwide, I mean that's not that many people when you think about it compared to how many people are running these races.
Yeah. What's funny about it is that when you turn on the social media, I mean, we run a pretty large social media account with Run for PRs, and so part of my job is trying to find athlete pictures after world major races, and so I see a lot of things on like the Explore page after the New York City Marathon, or after every single world major, you always see a lot of people showcasing that they got the 6-star finisher. And so I find it really interesting that you said only 900 people got it last year, but it seems like every influencer that I see on social media has gotten this. And I have also actually worked with quite a few people who have gotten the 6-star finisher medal, which now I think you have to get 7 stars. I'm not really sure how that works now that they added another race, but all this to say is, yes, you do have to be patient, especially if you're going the routes of entering the lotteries. I have a lot of friends in the running community who have attempted to get into some of these international races year after year, and it's a constant rejection. I think the way that most people are getting in to these races and really checking it off in a shorter term is that they are doing a lot of fundraising. So what does that mean? They are fundraising anywhere between $10,000 and $30,000 probably to get a bib and run the race. Because that is going to be probably your easiest way in if you're not a professional runner or lightning bolt fast. We see someone like Shalane Flanagan be able to do all of them within 1 year, and that's because she's a professional marathoner, and she has, it's Shalane Flanagan, of course. Professional runners, if you're very elite at running, you probably knock them all out. But for like the average person, the lay person out there, I also think there's not a lot of, but there is some of this going on in the influencer space. Is Abbott partners up sometimes with companies that do marketing. And I know this because back in, I want to say 2016, I was approached by a marketing company to get a bib for, I think it was like the 2016 Boston Marathon. And I was like, I'm already doing it. They were like, okay, well, can you create all this content for us? We want you to create content. We'll give you like, it was a couple $1,000s to do some posts. It was kind of weird, but this was the Wild West back then. This was 2016. And so anyone that had more than, I think I had like 60,000, 70,000 followers at the time, that was like big deal. I've never been approached since then, but all that is to say, I do know that there are influencers that got bibs to the Boston Marathon through, I think that like Highland, what is that Highland? It comes in a lot of those race packets. They're like the salt tabs or something. Like you take it, it's like the Highland Crampy and stuff. It's always at Boston.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and so they were giving out bibs. I want to say it was like 2 years ago, or maybe even last year, to just random people on social media a couple weeks before the Boston Marathon, or a couple months before. And a lot of people were like, hey, what is going on? And the reason why everyone knows about it is because they follow these people. And then they're sharing like, hey, I got a bib to X marathon, and they're promoting it, and that's what they're supposed to be doing because they're an influencer. So I think there's some controversy there, like in terms of there's a barrier to entry with the major marathons, and I think it can leave a lot of people with mixed emotions about that, because it is something that a lot of people do want to achieve, but when you're constantly getting rejected, and then you see someone on social media getting a bib for free, but I mean, is it really free if they're doing advertising work? It can turn some people off to it, and I also think it can make people feel like there is such a large barrier, because it's like, first of all, it costs a ton of money to be able to go to these things, so you have to have money. Next, how do you get in? And so I think sometimes the more money you make or the more position of power you're in, so you have hundreds of thousands of followers, boom, you can get yourself a bib. And I've seen this. I see it all the time. People who have large followings, they're getting comp entry, they're getting free this, free that,
right,
for promotional purposes. And I totally get it. I'm not salty about it, but I think that's something that could be brought up on this podcast just to let people kind of know the context. And sometimes you see things on social media, because I know the power of social media, right? You log in, you see things on social media. It looks like, quote unquote, everyone is doing these world majors. You feel FOMO, fear of missing out, because you see these people that have lots of followers and they're always traveling to these races. I think it's important to keep it in perspective and in context that majority of people that are traveling to these races, that are showing it on social media and it's popping up on your news feed, is probably, and if they have hundreds, thousands of likes on it, there could be some sort of behind the scenes thing that maybe you don't know about. So just throwing that out there, in case people are feeling like, why is everyone getting into these races except for me? There is that also piece of luck of the draw. Like, I know people who have no following on social media, they're not even on social media, and they've done Berlin and London. They got in first try for lottery. So it just really depends on your luck, and there's just a lot of factors that go into this. So I think when it comes to planning, you can't really necessarily control if you get in or not. So a couple weeks ago, a lot of people heard back about Chicago. Some people got in, some people didn't. And at that point, if you know you didn't get in, it's time to pivot and figure out what you're going to do for the fall, what you're going to do next year instead. There are other options if you really want to get in, maybe looking at fundraising. But otherwise, I think if you were drawn to the Chicago Marathon because it's a really large field and you like the spectators, then we should try to find a race that's similar in that regard. If you're drawn to Chicago because it's pretty flat and it's a good time of year in the Midwest, there's a lot of other marathons that have similar factors to this. And so I think if you're able to sit down with a coach who can help walk you through what is it that really appealed to you about that marathon, and how can we try to find something that you can do that's similar and maybe be like the best of both worlds, because there are a lot of other options available. And I know this podcast is specific to world majors, but part of the world majors is you get rejected. And so what do you do when you get that rejection email, that rejection letter? How do you pivot? And some of that is planning. Like, maybe you wanted to be running the Boston Marathon this year, but you got rejected because you didn't have a big enough buffer, and you're not even doing a spring marathon. Part of that is, okay, what can I do instead? If your goal is to get to run the Boston Marathon, maybe we look at, if you want to increase that buffer, how can we run the fastest possible time? And we've done an episode in the past about how people can run the fastest possible time. And that would be maybe trying a Revel race. So a Revel race is a down a mountain marathon. Get alpha flies, right? This is what other people are doing, and that's how people are getting the fastest possible times. And so I like to say, do everything you can in your power to get the biggest buffer possible, and then let the stars fall wherever they do. And you can use that to get into Boston. But it's so much. I think for people who are listening to this and they're interested in world majors and they're hearing, whoa, you have to like qualify just to be able to get into a race. So, I mean, this is something that could take decades or longer for some people. Because just to qualify for Boston, like I'm sitting here right now, if I wanted to run Boston next year, I would have to run a marathon under 325, well under 325, by end of September. Now, if I wanted to push it 2 years out, okay, this fall I can run, like in October, November, I could run a marathon under 330, get an even bigger buffer because I age up. And so there's just so much planning, and it can really make your head spin. So I would say, if your goal is to run all the majors, and you want to be a 7-star, every single year you should be applying to every single lottery that is available to you, trying to get in every single race, and pretty much every time you get in, you gotta go. And so that brings up a good point, is I don't really know how many people can drop everything once a year and go to Tokyo and
Right.
pay for the international flight, book the hotel, all that stuff. So that's an expense piece, but definitely apply to everything every year. Try to get as fast as possible so you can get those qualifiers. So if you're within the U.S. and you're a female, like under the age of 40, if you can get in the 3.0s, sub 3, you could probably get into all these races pretty easily.
Right.
New York is going to be the hardest one to get in with the qualifier. But Chicago and Boston, if you're able to run like in the 3 teens, you're pretty much in. For females. For guys, if you're in like the 240s, you're in automatically. Not automatically, but I mean, for the most part, you've qualified. So that knocks out 2 of them. The rest of them is just apply to the lottery constantly. And it's every single year. It's like, well, and then the worst part, I don't know if this is the worst part, but this would be the worst part for me. If all of a sudden you did get in to one of these that you weren't expecting to get into. So like, for example, I applied to London, I think, last year.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, okay, if I get in, I guess I gotta go do London. And I didn't get in. And then we also have Coach Mary, who applied to Sydney. She just like threw her name in the hat. She's like, I won't get in. She got into Sydney and Chicago. And people are like, oh, that won't happen. No, this happens all the time. I have so many athletes every year that are like, I'm doing Berlin and Chicago. I'm doing Chicago and New York. And it's because they just so happen to get in to a lottery and they have a qualifier, or they got into both lotteries. And so it's like they're doing Berlin and New York, or they're doing, and they weren't expecting, and they know that it's kind of a lot to do, but that's oftentimes how things play out, is you might just have to do back-to-back marathons like that. And what that would require of you, both financially and physically, from being in marathon shape, is important to consider for sure.
Yeah, I really like how you gave so many examples of like, motives for wanting to do these races, right? And I know a lot of athletes, they want to experience maybe some of those more local races because of those factors you mentioned. Like, they just like the time of year, maybe the course support that's flat, right? If you're a local athlete to Chicago, then you probably have a better chance of getting in there than someone else that lives in like Florida or California, because there are more local events and opportunities for you to earn a bid. Just like New York, as I mentioned earlier, through the NYRR group.
Oh, right, the 9+.
That. Yep. So, but, and if you're not fast enough, let's say you're pretty far away from getting those time qualifications, then yes, you are going to have to rely on the lottery or find another one-off way to obtain a bid. And some of those international ones, there are ways. I think if you're, online as soon as they open and you're willing to pay extra, you might be able to obtain a bid for like London through Marathon Tours. You just have to really like be aware of when these deadlines are and when things open up. And but again, they require you to commit to staying in their accommodations and all that too. So, but there are other ways, and I know that I've had a lot of athletes do doubles within a month time. They're doing Berlin and Chicago, or they do Berlin in the fall. They come back with London in the spring. So it is possible that you do get your name drawn. I think there's a lot of people out there that they don't necessarily want to do all 6 or 7. They just maybe want to experience 1 or 2, right? And I think we get that a lot too. And so you need to just do what it takes, as you mentioned, like maybe trying to get faster to qualify, or just be relentless with putting in the lottery. But yeah, I mean, that's how I was when I first signed up for Chicago. I didn't have any intention of adding another major or whatever. It was just about trying to go somewhere where I could run fast. And so definitely, these are some great races, and I think that's why they're so popular, is people want to experience a really fun atmosphere in a vibrant major city.
Yeah, if you're really serious about it, I think going to Marathon Tours and Destination Marathon. So these are both websites, and they host basically guaranteed entry for some of those races that you mentioned. So again, that's Marathon Tours and Destination Marathons. So you're basically able to buy a package and get into some of these races, but you have to make sure you're getting in at the right time. So really studying the website. So let's say right now London is all booked up. Okay, that means right after the London Marathon, I would honestly be emailing and be
Right.
like, when is London 2026 going to be opening up for registration? Bookmark it on your calendar. It's kind of like when it opens up, you need to be there. You need to be logging in. Similar to the Disney Marathon, I know that when that one goes up, you gotta be like refreshing the page. I don't know where people live, but when we sign our kids up for activities, it's like you gotta be on the page when they open it up. Otherwise, you're gonna be on the wait list. So same thing goes for these destination marathons or marathon tours. So again, that's knocking out London, Berlin, and Sydney if you get in through the marathon tour. So that's 3 of them. If you're fast enough, New York, Chicago, and Boston. And some people might be saying, well, I'm not fast enough to get into those 3. Well, why don't you fundraise those 3? Some people say, well, I'm not good at fundraising. Well, those are your 2 options. Like, what are you better at, fundraising or running fast? I don't know. And then the hardest one, I think, for most people is getting into Tokyo, especially if you're American, because they don't really, it's like straight up lottery, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
which is the one that Allie works for? Marathon Tours.
So they merged with Sports Tour International now.
Okay.
So I don't even think the destination website is active anymore. But
so it's Sports Tours International.
Yeah.
They potentially were trying to maybe get some Tokyo bits.
Sure. Yeah.
But I know that one's a really tough one. So the more you can knock out, the better. And then just keep entering your name into these lotteries every single year. Really important. So with me having ran 5 World Majors, I mean, I ran the same one every time. But I've done 5. Yeah. I mean, if you count like repeating courses, and you've done 3,
right?
If you repeat courses, how does it compare, right? So I've done 27 marathons, 5 of them were World Majors, so I've done 22 non. The smallest race I've done was like 40 people. It was an ultra marathon. But the Boston Marathon is definitely the largest I've done. So how does it compare, right? So traveling to a major marathon is going to be very expensive, and the cost of hotels and Airbnb spikes during those weekends in major cities. You can do things to stay for cheap, but in general, the people who do the majors also have major money.
Right. And if you want to make it logistically easier on yourself, it's convenient to stay near where the race course is.
Right, because it's like added stress if you don't.
And traveling and getting in, and I've heard horror stories of people trying to get on subways and stuff like in Chicago and being late, because they took the train and that sort of thing.
And I'm not necessarily saying you have to have a lot of money to do them. I mean, the first time we went to Boston, right, like I was 23. We were broke and young, right? When you did Chicago for the first time, or the only time, you were, 25, 26? Yeah. Just starting a teaching career. Like, we didn't have much money, and I think it was like stayed at someone's house that you knew with someone else that was running, and it was like we drove there, and it was the bare minimum. But again, like, I think in order to really perform, sometimes people have they were like more bougie. I don't know. I think when you're young and you don't have a lot of money, you're not like very bougie. So it's like you can stay on the floor of somehow, because we literally slept on the floor. Did. Yeah. We slept on the floor.
2 different, yeah. And then one thing, Marathon Tours has a lot of good accommodations through a variety of hotels for these major races. So you can get really good room rates. Like, I was shocked at some of the room rates in Boston.
Oh, yeah.
As low as like $200 and something, like $300. But again, not the best hotels, but at least they are close and the proximity is convenient. So, and then too, like, we saved, I think, probably $300 to $400 a night booking through them as opposed to the hotel directly. So there are benefits if you can get connected with some of these marathon groups.
Right, and if you stay further out, I'm sure you can save a ton of money, do like an Airbnb or a Vrbo. It just depends on how cost effective you want to be. But I think you can really go all out on some of these. I know the run group that we used to be a part of, the Lifetime Fitness Run out of St. Louis Park, they had like a Boston Marathon group that they would put together, and they blocked off hotel rooms at this hotel right by the finish, Park Plaza. And I remember those rooms were like $550 a night, and they were teeny, and It's just crazy, $550 a night, and everyone's like, yeah, we're gonna go for 6 days. I'm like, oh,
we're gonna go for
wow. Yeah, like
Right.
I can't afford that. But then they have like this minimum stay of gotta stay 3 nights. And it is fun, but also just knowing that that's what you're looking at. Like that hotel is not normally $550 a night. They chalk everything up that weekend and make it a little bit more expensive. And then they also had these coach buses that you could pay a certain amount of money to get on. And it's just there's always all these add-ons, which is fun if you have the funds to do it. But if you don't, it's going to be a little bit of a different experience. I also find for myself the majors make me a little bit more nervous just because there's so much more logistics for getting to these things. There's a lot more downtime waiting around and being nervous. Nothing like hopping into that expo, right? The expo is just like, oh my gosh, there's so many people here, and some people love it. They thrive on that, and I think Jason, you're one of those people that like gets you excited. Whereas I think other people, it's nerve-wracking and they don't really like it. And I know even Coach Emmy and we were both at Boston this year, and we were both expressing how we just wanted to stay in our hotel room and just like go. We didn't want to be around crowds. We didn't want to be around people. And so you really have to know yourself and like what gives you energy. Some people love it. Some people, they don't. And so knowing that about yourself is really good when you're planning things. The majors have a ton more participation people. There's so many more people. There's a lot of people in the city just to spectate, and there's a lot of participants in general. This can be fun to run with people, but you also have to think it's like 10 times the size of a normal big race. So what I always envision, so if you guys have done races in the past, I always think of any race that you ever do, how many people are around you. If it's no one, like Jason, for example, if there's the times that you did major marathons, usually if you were doing like a 5K or half marathon, there would be no one to run with. Like around here, maybe one person. So for you, when you go to do a major, it's like, wow, you have like 10, 20 people to run with.
Right.
It's not overly crowded. For me, if I do a 5K, there's quite a few people around me. I'm not like middle of the pack, but it's, there's some people, when I go to a major, you can't get a water cup. So I can't imagine what it would be like to be at like NYC around like the 4:30 group, like the average finish time, the median.
Yeah.
Because it would be so crowded, and I've seen videos. I've heard the experiences. I mean, I coach for a living, and so it's a lot of not being able to kind of get around. It's very crowded, and some people, they don't mind, they like it. Other people, it's like not the experience that they were expecting. And so the reason that I bring this up is because it is a factor. And sometimes people get into these things and they don't realize what they're signing up for. And so it is going to be incredibly crowded, especially if you're a mid-pack runner. If you're like elite, not a huge difference. It won't ruin your experience getting a water cup. It won't be like wall-to-wall people. But the closer you are to middle of the pack or average time, finish time of the race, it's going to be thick for a while. The time zone changes and jet lag can also be a huge factor. So when we go to Boston, not a big deal. When you went to Chicago, there isn't one. But I've coached a lot of people. I can think of one athlete this past year, I believe it was Berlin. Yeah, she went to Berlin from Oklahoma. So a decent time change. And she actually also got sick at the same time, but because of the jet lag, she didn't realize that she was actually getting ill. She just thought she was tired from the jet lag. And so it can be one of these things where it's a big factor. And so with the jet lag, I almost recommend kind of going a little bit ahead of time so that you can get settled. And so the more international these are, the more travel time you need to factor in and realize traveling is kind of stressful on the body. So it might be just worth knowing that and preparing for, hey, it might not be like my A-race performance. I always think that if I were to do these, I would just want to be chill with them, maybe go moderate pace, easy pace, but I can't imagine how stressful it would be to try to fly internationally and then try to PR a marathon.
Yeah, but you bring up a great point. For all the factors you just mentioned, especially if you're going over the pond to London or something and you expect to run great. And you know what? Like, maybe you do, but I think just going into it with not the same level of expectation that you might have if it was more of a local race because of all those factors, adjusting to the time zone, right? Like just the learning about the culture maybe when you're there. Let's say if you're in Tokyo, or you got to plan your meals, right? I mean, just things are going to take time, transportation, getting around, all of these factors, and then you mentioned obviously the people in the actual race. That can really the cluster can slow you down, and so it's better to just really enjoy those experiences, and maybe pick something that's a little more familiar to you for like a PR attempt. But definitely fun if you are kind of like me and you thrive on those crowds and you really like the being in big races. I think they are a lot of fun. I think you can get a similar feel in some of the other races that we'll talk about here coming up, but there's definitely some prestige feeling to completing one of these races and traveling to these areas and getting to stay in the big city. So
definitely. And as you were talking, I actually just realized that both of us have our non-down a mountain PR is from a world major.
Right.
So
and even my
flat or normal PR, not a Rebel race, is from the Boston Marathon 311, and yours is 246 from Chicago. So you can PR at these races, but I think part of the factor that allowed us to do that was it was not super far. Like, I don't know if I could go overseas and do that. Maybe. It depends on if you're in shape. And I do think, like, the excitement and having people to run with, it can be a benefit, but you really have to know what you're getting into. And I think when you went to Chicago, you knew what you were getting into. You knew there were going to be people to run with. You knew how to approach that.
Right.
And when I did Boston, I ran 311. I think it was my fourth time running the Boston Marathon, so I knew the course. I knew what to expect. And just knowing I think the more big races you do and the more experience you have doing large races, the better you're going to perform at a large race. So if you're someone that's like, I got this, then you probably do got this. But if you've never done a big race before, it can be a completely different experience than like your hometown local 5K. Yeah.
Right. I think we were both super confident heading into those majors on that day, in where our fitness was at.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's really key if you do, expect to run well there, is having that confidence. And if you're going over to Berlin and you're kind of like, you had sort of an okay training cycle and you're kind of unsure, like, you know what, rather than putting this huge time goal and this pressure on yourself, it's better to go in with a little bit more grace and just say, you know what, I'm just going to enjoy this and try to feel good and have a good experience. And we'll see what the time says at the end, and then I can maybe make a plan for my next race and trying to beat that time or whatever. So
right.
Yeah.
And what I love about it is that when you go to a major, you know the aid stations are going to be stocked. Like, there's going to be aid station pretty much every mile.
That's part of the requirements is like.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I believe it's about aid stations, the
bathrooms.
size of the tables, like they need a certain number of water cups and all these factors. Like, so they have
never
to
gonna run
adhere
out.
to strict standards in order to maintain their major status.
Right. They're like legit,
Right.
I mean, it's when you're on that course, you know you're going to get everything you need. And it's a high quality race, so I think it can be a really good environment for setting PR. The thing I really love too is there's clocks at every 5K, at least in the ones that we've done. And I don't know, like going over that timing mat and like knowing people are tracking, and it's just really, it's a fun experience because when else is everyone kind of like eyes on that race, right? It like when you run the New York City Marathon, people who don't even run might see it on the news or they are aware of it, and so they might be kind of hype for you when if it was just some other race, like a Rebel race, like people aren't hype about, they don't even know about it. But everyone knows the New York City Marathon's coming up in November. Not everyone, but a lot more people know about these races and they can kind of get hyped up for you. And so I feel like the energy before you go there, when you come back, the whole environment of the expo, the race, is on a completely different caliber that you can't really recreate at a different race. But with that being said, that's why they are the World Major Marathon, right? I mean, they're on a different standard. So if you're looking for a different option, right? If you're like, I didn't get into any of my majors this year, or I want to try something different, I would look at other local marathons, look at fast courses. I wanted to, after running that 3:11 at Boston, I thought, okay, I've done Boston a few times. I don't really have an interest in doing other world majors at the moment. I'm going to try out some of these downhill races. And so there's other niche opportunities within the running community to do cool races. I was always kind of intrigued by Revel, having coached people for it for a decade almost before doing my first myself. So Revel is essentially a not downhill down a mountain per se on a road, and they flatten out kind of towards the end, but they're in really cool locations and you get to see the mountains the whole time you run, and I think it's a pretty well run organization. Other ones that are really good are just the standard ones you always are hearing about, Grandma's, CIM, Houston. These are not majors, but they're pretty big, well known, and have a pretty solid reputation. They're also going to have, enough aid stations where you're not feeling like you're deprived or anything like that. And if that's not your thing, if you're like, I don't really want a big race, I don't want spectators, and I definitely don't want to do a downhill course, maybe you're into other stuff. I know there's some races around here that are kind of smaller, and maybe you're that person that maybe wants to see if they could place or win it. Maybe you try to find the smallest marathon you could do. Maybe find one that, hey, I could get first in my age group or something like that. I remember in 2014? I don't remember. 2014, it is this University of Okoboji Marathon in Iowa in the middle of July. And I won the race, but there was only 80 people doing the marathon. But it's still really cool to say, hey, I won a marathon with 3:26. But everyone has different goals and different things that excite them. For some people, that would be the thing that really gets them going. For other people, they love the crowd support. There are some races that have killer crowd support that aren't even really that big. I would say the Twin Cities Marathon, wow, that crowd support it's very similar to Boston. I mean, people are loud at Twin Cities. But there's other marathons like Grandma's, I would say they're similar size, but there's no crowd support at Grandma's. I would say nothing. Yeah. Same with Revel. You're alone.
Right.
You're you're in the mountains. There's no one can even get to you. It's a point to point. Like you get up to the point of the mountain, the road's closed. There's no spectators. And for some people, they're like, count me out. CIM, there's pockets. But I'd say if you're looking for people screaming at you most of the way, Twin Cities Marathon, they got you.
Yeah, if you thrive off sort of a bigger crowd, spectator support, and maybe just a deep field of people around you, for marathons in the U.S., I would say the ones you mentioned, for sure. Houston, maybe. Indy. Philly is a good one.
Oh, Indy.
Philadelphia. At Marine Corps has become very popular.
Yes, Philly.
I think Richmond in Virginia is pretty fast, and people seem to love that one too. But yeah, Indy for sure. And there's a couple others too. I know in the spring that I'm blanking on, but like in Ohio or something.
City.
Yeah. So there are a lot, and the Abbott World Majors website, they have other featured races too. So it's not just their 7 majors.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I see on here they talk about Rome and Zurich, and so maybe that appeals to you is traveling to a different race internationally that's not a major. I'm fairly certain you could at least do those because they probably aren't going to sell out. And that's the other benefit. You mentioned some of these races like the Revel, and a lot of them won't sell out. You could almost register up until the day before the race. So if you have to pivot to something else, then explore these options. However, I've also noticed that some of those bigger races I just mentioned, like Philly, is one of them I know for a fact. Maybe Richmond, I can't remember. But those races are starting to sell out now in the fall. So and Detroit is the one too. That one sold out. So you have to make sure that you don't wait too long, because if it's a pretty good size race, and I know like Twin Cities, Grandma's, yes, they sell out now. So you can't just rely on waiting to see. You kind of do have to make a decision. But there are plenty out there that don't probably sell out. And so Yeah,
Yeah, we're in a running boom right now.
we are.
So I think that's why we're seeing a lot of these races sell out. And that's really great because more people are getting into the sport. But also just knowing that you will probably have to sign up in advance for a lot of these races. And I feel like a decade ago, Chicago, they didn't always like fill up the way that it does
No, when I registered in 2011 for
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 2012.
2012, I mean everyone. I think I'm pretty sure everyone got in. I'm not
Yeah.
100% sure, but
Or it was
But
like a
then
first come,
a
first
couple
serve.
of years later, then they started this lottery system where
Hmm.
you almost had a better chance getting in if you put other people's names on the list who also wanted to do it, and then they would like pull groups in or something. But yep, then they started releasing these time qualifications, and I think ever since then it's become more popular and more difficult to get in.
Yeah, it's wild. So definitely planning ahead if your goal is to do the world major marathons. It could take a decade or decades. But I think the more aggressive you are with things, maybe that means you're going to go through marathon tours or some of those other websites we mentioned to try to get in and take those packages. Or maybe you're entering the lottery every single year, or you're doing fundraising, whatever it may be. The more aggressive you are with those means, probably the sooner you're going to be able to get into all of them. And if you finish all of them, you get a medal.
Mm-hmm.
So you get your finisher's medal, and then you get this little medal with all the little stars around it. And you can say that you're a 6 or 7-star finisher. So that's what you get for finishing. Um, it's it's hard to get into the races. They're they're expensive.
I think we're laughing because like we've done like the Dopey challenge, right, or the Goofy challenge where you get an extra medal just for completing, but it's like where are those medals now? We've collected so many over the years
Right.
that it's like
I just I just am laughing because it's so much work to
Oh, it
do
is.
to
And all
do
you're gonna get
them,
is an
and
extra
then now
medal.
you get the
But
medal. It's kind of like when you finish a marathon, they give you a banana.
like
at
it'd
the
be cool
end.
to get like a jacket. Would be
Yeah,
pretty cool.
I
Like
think
something usable,
I
right?
think you can get a
You can
jacket.
buy it,
Yeah,
of
like
course.
yeah. But I mean, it's so much work. I think it's more to say that you did it. It's not
Right.
really about. I mean, of course, the medal's important and cool, but it's that you do it for the experience. It's like the process, right? It's like you're not doing it to get the medal, but that is what you get at the end. You're
But that's
not.
what people are posting.
They're
I think
posting the
we're
medal,
seeing it a
but
lot.
they're doing it to travel the world to
Right.
do.
Experience all of
So
them to say they've done that.
yeah, I think
right?
I was laughing because it's just like that's not what it's about, and
Right.
it's just it sounds like so corny, but it's about hey, like I went to all these different countries and ran a marathon in them. I mean that in itself is to me what the experience is all about, and yeah, you get a medal to show that you did it, and I think it's a really cool thing. Definitely something that would be awesome to achieve at some point, but again, it's like how bad do you want it? Right? I mean, for me, it's like I don't know that I want it bad enough to be that into entering the lotteries, doing all that international stuff. So, but if you really want it, get after it, go for it, and we would love to help you. We've worked with a lot of people who, I mean, how many people you said you got to get the 6-star? No one.
Well, about 4 people are working on it right now.
Oh, no
I
one's
think
gotten it.
someone is about to finish it once they do Tokyo. But
Yeah, I have like probably 3 people who've gotten it over the years, and yeah, it's like a really big accomplishment. It's really cool. And then what's cool is they usually go back and do them again. Not all of them, but
especially their favorites. Right?
Yeah,
They had a good experience.
right. It's like it's like a
Yeah.
lifestyle for people. They love them, and I can see the allure of going back. I mean, there's a reason why I did Boston 5 times. It's because it's a well-run course. It's you know what you're gonna get, and that's really what you're getting when you do a world major marathon. You're getting a high-class experience. So if that's something you're interested in and you want to have a coach maybe take out some of that stress or maybe talk things through with your coach, I know in the past, like I've recommended different resources to my athletes or different places to stay, or we've chatted things out about logistically what makes sense for where they're traveling for their major marathon, especially if it's within the US. We have a lot of information that we can share with you to help you feel like it's a comfortable experience going to these places. All of our coaches have done the world majors. We have coaches that have done all of them within the US, so feeling very comfortable with those. So if you have one on the schedule later this year, we would be happy to help and guide you in the best way possible to that marathon. And if you maybe have multiple that you're doing, I have a ton of experience coaching with that. So does Jason and all of our coaches. It's something that's very common. We see it all the time of people having to do Berlin and New York or New York and Chicago back to back. And we totally understand the goal and the allure of doing the major marathons. And so we can help you achieve those goals without getting burnt out or injured in the best way possible, specific to your background and goals. So if that's something you're interested in, or if you just want to get run coaching for something that's not even related to the world majors, we do that too. You can fill out the website fill out the form on our website at www.run4prs.com for a free 7-day trial. Again, that is www.run4prs.com. Fill out the form there and we can get you set up with a free week of training with a coach. Thanks for tuning in.